This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.
Welcome to the Lake Superior Podcast. I'm Walt, Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara. We are made stronger by story, and there's no better source than the continent's largest body of fresh water, Lake Superior.
So join us as we highlight the 5 national parks that ring this greatest of the Great Lakes, meet the people, tour the places, and learn about the projects that make these parks and body of water so remarkable.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
I'm Walt Lindala.
And I'm Frida, Waara.
Welcome once again to the Lake Superior Podcast. Today, we're going in an interesting direction. Frida, tell us about it.
You know, when I can feel the snow is starting to happen out there, it's kind of bubbling up on that lake. It also means storms. And Walt, the fall season has certainly been historically when we've had some of the biggest blows on Lake Superior. In fact, I distinctly remember November 10th, 1975. I was a bride, had just been married, and we lived on Hewitt Street in Marquette. And my husband and Rob Schmidt, his buddy, got on their thickest wetsuits, and they went out to play in that surf. This was before we had surfers, before that really was what you did in Marquette. And little did we know that just about 100 miles east, there was going to be one of the greatest maritime disasters in the history of Lake Superior with the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
And it's interesting you bring this up because about half a dozen years ago or so, there was another big storm that came through on Lake Superior that I remember really well, covering it here in Marquette, that it was just super high winds. Unfortunately, there was a couple of fatalities because people got swept off the rocks at Presque Isle. And it really drives home the point, Frida, and I know you're making this, that with this kind of weather, we need some communication devices and things out there. And that's kind of where we're going today.
Absolutely. I guess there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 78 lighthouses on Lake Superior. 42 of those are in Michigan, and apparently about 20 of them are open to the public. And I was so lucky that I got to go into one of the lighthouses at Pictured Rocks, and we have with us today Emma and Hannah to share that story.
That's right. Park Ranger from Pictured Rocks is Emma Olechnowicz, and also Hannah Bradburn, Visual Information Specialist. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, we're glad to be here. Yeah, thanks.
Let's talk about it a little bit. Hannah, Emma, both, tell us a little bit about the work that you do at Pictured Rocks.
Yeah, so this is Hannah. I'll talk a little bit about what I do. My name's Hannah Bradburn, and I am the Visual Information Specialist here at Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. So it's kind of a fancy title for graphic designer and social media manager. So anything that you see on our Facebook or our Instagram, that's probably me posting that. And I'm also working through a big wayside project here where we're redoing all of our interpretive signage to be new and fresh. But I also work really collaboratively with the entire interpretation and education team, which is where Emma comes in. And we do tours all through the summer, and that's the bulk of it in the summer. And then in the wintertime, we do some interpretation and education with schools around the UP. And Emma, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, so my name is Emma. I'm an interpretation ranger. So during the summer, I give tours in the lighthouse. I create public programs for visitors, do special events. So I get to be the friendly ranger in the flat hat that you're most likely to see in the park. Right now, I'm kind of working video projects and starting educational programming for students. So we do a lot of stuff with kids in the winter time here as well.
let's talk a little bit about lighthouses at Pictured Rocks. How many are we talking about? And then maybe a little bit more discussion about what it is that intrigues people and lures people to come and check these out.
Yeah, for sure. So here at Pictured Rocks, we manage 3 buildings that would be considered lighthouses. So first we'll start in Munising, and in Munising we have the front and back range lights. So those are right in town. They're right downtown, so they're not open to the public, but you can see them as you drive through town towards the park. And so the range lights are navigational buildings, and they basically tell you when you're going straight into a bay or a channel that you're on track. And so the front one still operates today. The rear one no longer operates. And then our kind of star of the show for lighthouses is the Sable Light Station, and I think that's what we'll talk a little bit more about today.
It's interesting as you talk about these that people like to check these out. And I think they're not called beacons for nothing. I mean, they kind of seem to bring people in. But what is it about lighthouses that when you're talking to people that are visiting the park and coming to check it out, that they want to check out what they want to know about them?
Yeah, so this is Emma again, but the Sable Light Station really, I think, draws people in just because it's such a different era in history. A lot of people, there's still people alive today that were lighthouse keepers. So it's not so far removed from people who are alive today and can still tell those stories. And it's just something that we don't really need anymore with technology and LED lights and all that stuff. But it reminds people of a very different era. I think it's also serve as a good reminder that Lake Superior is still really dangerous. Mm-hmm. We still have a light in our lighthouse today, and some people are surprised by that we still have lighthouses and still need those navigational aids out on Lake Superior.
Can you share with us a little bit about the history of the Sable Light? I think it was built in 1874, and when I was doing a little research, the oldest lighthouse on Lake Superior was Whitefish Point in 1861. So this one's not that far behind because it's not like you built a lighthouse overnight.
Yeah, you're totally right, and you're right on the money with 1874, Frida. Good memory there from our tour last week. But yeah, so really, to talk fully about the Sable Light Station, we have to go before 1874 and talk about just what are the conditions on Lake Superior that made it necessary. Like a lighthouse, we typically don't put lighthouses just anywhere at random, right? So this particular coastline from Grand Island to Whitefish Point has long been feared by mariners, for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It's been pretty well understood that this section of lakeshore is not to be trifled with, I mean, Lake Superior as a whole, as we've already talked about, is really intense, and you get those huge storms, but it's even more so along that 80 or so mile stretch between Grand Island and Whitefish Point. And you also combine that with the Pictured Rocks cliffs. If a storm rolls in and you're right next to those cliffs, you're not really getting out too easily. So that made for some pretty treacherous sailing as well. And then, you get the dunes, particularly around Sable. So the Grand Sable Dunes are these 300-foot almost cliffs of sand, and they produce really dense fog around Sable Point. And then at Sable as well, there is a sandstone reef that comes pretty close to the surface of the water, which created a really big hazard for mariners. They would stick close to the coastline in a technique called coasting before there was GPS to navigate, and that would get them into some issues. Getting a little too close to shore at Sable meant the bottom of your boat was probably going to get ripped up, and that would result in a lot of fatalities, especially as Michigan's economy was booming and just the entire area. You had your copper mining, you had your iron mining, fur trade even before that, and logging as well. There was a lot of commerce going through the Great Lakes, and with more commerce came more accidents as well. And, hundreds of people lost their lives, tons of ships were damaged as well, and, the people started realizing something has to change. There was this big section of darkness between Grand Island and Whitefish Point that was just claiming lives and claiming boats, and something had to give. And Emma, I don't know if you wanted to continue the story there.
Yeah, so we're not the only lighthouse. Obviously, between Munising and Whitefish Point now, there's a few others, but we were kind of one of the few that, like you said, after Whitefish Point got put in, that we needed to kind of add to this little area here as well. So they built it in 1874, and that means we are celebrating our 150th anniversary next year, which is kind of exciting.
Let's talk about the space now. You can check it out. When you look at it, it's obviously that means a lot to be able to see it, but you maybe see some other buildings, not just a lighthouse tower. So there was more of a small complex, maybe at least some support buildings. Tell us about what's all there.
Yeah, so originally in 1874, it was just the lighthouse and the building attached to it, which was known as the Lightkeepers' Quarters, which is where they lived. I know Hannah was talking about the fog coming off of the sand dunes. Of course, a lighthouse or a bright light doesn't shine very well through the fog. So another building that's out there that you'll kind of see right as you walk across the grounds there is the fog signal building. And that was actually designed to emit a really loud noise. They had 2 train whistles mounted to the top of that building. And those train whistles would go off every 12 seconds the entire time it was foggy. So it was not a quiet place to live out there, but that was kind of an alternative to the lighthouse when the fog was so dense that you couldn't see the light or see the shoreline out there as well. So that was sort of a support building that really helped support the lighthouse and, again, keep mariners off of that point and off of the sandstone reef that's out there.
And I was over at the Apostles. We went up to Devil's Island, and that is the first time I saw 2 houses there. And then when I came to Sable, there's also 2 lighthouse keeper dwellings. Why was that?
Yeah, so the original one was built in 1874. The other one is a little newer. It was built in 1910. And that was actually just to accommodate more workers. Originally, there was only 1 lighthouse keeper, but eventually they realized they needed 2, and eventually they even upped that to 3 lighthouse keepers. Those keepers typically brought their spouses and families with them, so they needed more living space. So that second building, it houses our museum now, but it was originally the head lighthouse keeper's quarters. So the man that was in charge out there got his own house and his own outhouse as well. But then the other building was changed into a duplex to house 2 families, the 2 assistant keepers and their families as well. So during its heyday, you had 3 families living out there together, which hopefully made it a little bit less lonely to be out there and be a lighthouse keeper.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and ask about that because a lot of times, especially in some of the conversations we've had on the podcast here with some of the other lighthouses on the lake, that there is a sense of feeling a definite sort of like you're alone out there. The keeper is alone. There's nobody there. This sounds like it was designed to be a little bit more, maybe less daunting to be assigned to this particular lighthouse, right?
Yeah, you might think that because, you're on the mainland, you're not on an island, if you're in the Apostles and you are stationed at a lighthouse out there, you are separated by water. But I had read quite a few, lighthouse keepers' logs. They kept really detailed journals while they were out there. And it seemed like Au Sable, for being on the mainland, was still a pretty lonely place to be. Before the 1930s, there was no roads that went into Au Sable Point, so you either had to walk out through the dunes. So the Grand Sable Dunes, like I said, are these huge sand dunes, which were, that would not be too fun to walk out. So the closest town there is Grand Marais, and that's 12 miles away via the dunes. Or you're going by boat out over Lake Superior, and probably on a pretty small boat, so you got to wait until, the lake is calm, and you can actually get to Grand Marais in a small ship as well. So it was a pretty lonely existence. Au Sable took veteran keepers of the Lighthouse Service who'd been working with the Lighthouse Service for 20, 30 years. And it kind of broke those people. You know, there's people who were longtime veterans that worked a couple seasons at Au Sable and decided it's time for a career change. You know, we're done with the lighthouses now. So for the mainland, it was pretty lonely still.
I got to ask you this. You mentioned that there was no roads to it and everything. Give me a little bit of understanding of how was this built? How were these materials to build these brought there? Was it through then along the water and the shore, or how was this made?
Yeah, that's a great question. Nowadays, you know, everything comes in with a truck, but back then everything would have come in via boat, off of the lake, come in either, you know, from Marquette or from Grand Marais. That was how they got it in.
Can you describe for us the tower and then the light that they had in there in 1874?
Yeah, so the tower is a part of the tour that we give during the summer. So visitors are welcome to climb up the 98 steps spiral staircase all the way to the very top. And in the very top, we're very lucky to have a Fresnel lens. Fresnel lenses were pretty common. That was the standard in lighthouses really all across the United States and the world. Fresnel lenses were invented in France by a man named Fresnel in 1822, and that's where most of them were produced. Ours was manufactured in Paris, France, and then shipped over here in pieces, and then very, very carefully boated out and hauled up the lighthouse tower to be installed. It replaced an older lens and extended the range of lantern light, so flame lit light, from 2 miles to about 18 miles with the Fresnel lens. So it made a really, really big difference. Just for people who've maybe never seen a Fresnel lens before, they're basically dozens of pieces of glass that are held together with kind of brass casing around it. And it works sort of like a kaleidoscope. So the pieces of glass reflect and refract lantern light into a really bright central beam in the center of the lens. And that's what kind of concentrated the flame light into something much brighter than you would expect from a lantern. Ours is a third-order lens, so it's about 5 foot tall and 3 foot across, and it weighs about 2,000 pounds. So it's a really, really heavy, really big piece of equipment. And obviously was brought up in individual pieces. We're really lucky to still have ours just because of the size and how fragile it is. It's all real, solid, very carefully created glass.
Hannah and Emma, I am a kayaker, and right now I am just imagining when my husband says we're taking eggs on a kayak trip, and I go, oh, no, we're not taking eggs. And you think now about all these thousands of pieces of precious glass, and it made it. It made it. And it's still there to observe it. And now, though, you've replaced the Fresnel. That happened, was it in the 60s, 50s, 60s that the lens was automated?
Yeah, so 1958 was the last year that we had an actual lighthouse keeper living here with the Fresnel lens. And then they switched over to more electric lights and different kinds of lenses. And yeah, like you said, it was all automated, so it just comes on once it gets dark enough out and shuts off in the morning. And of course, over the years, they've updated it even further. It's now owned and operated by the Coast Guard, so we don't do any of the updating or the deciding what kind of lens to have out there, but they do all of that, which is pretty neat that we still have an active lighthouse out here.
One of my favorite fun facts with the automation of the lighthouse is we went from this lens that was 5 feet tall and 2,000 pounds, that's still up there, and it's been downsized so much to something not even as big as a crock pot, and it still does the same job. So it's just incredible how much things have changed, but it still performs the same function.
Yeah, it's still doing the same thing out there, which is communicating to those out on the water that you are close to some land. We're talking with Hannah Bradburn today, who is Visual Information Specialist, and Emma Olechnowicz, who is Park Ranger at Pictured Rocks, about the Sable Light. And very interesting, interesting history here so far.
You know, Walt, I got stuck in fog badly on the North Shore of Isle Royale. Hannah and Emma, do you have anything that's still a fog signal out there?
So we don't have anything that turns on that you would be able to hear. We still have the two train whistles. They're no longer mounted to the top of that fog signal, but now they're actually inside of our museum building. So you can definitely see them inside the fog signal building. We still have some pieces of that old system. It was steam-powered originally and coal-powered, and eventually they switched over to diesel. So you can still see some of those pieces if you come out and visit. But we don't have a fog signal that goes off anymore out there. So not quite as loud anymore as it used to be 100 years ago.
I'm sure.
I can imagine.
So as the summer ends and fall moves in and winter comes in and the storms really start to ramp up at that time of year, you know, Frida alluded to it earlier in the podcast about 1975 and the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald in a terrible storm. Can you tell us if there's any evidence of any shipwrecks near Sable Point, any of that kind of history for us?
Yeah, so if anybody wants to come out and visit the lighthouse, you're bound to see a couple of different shipwrecks that are actually still just underneath the water or even washed up on the beach. We have 3 shipwrecks in between Hurricane River, which is where you would park, and the lighthouse itself. The Mary Jarecki is right underneath the water, so on calm days you can usually see the outline of that. The Gale Staples and the Sitka were almost identical wooden steamships, so we don't know which pieces belong to which shipwreck anymore because they move quite a bit. Like you said, in the fall we have really big storms. And a lot of times that moves those shipwreck pieces every year. They're not stagnant or bolted into place in any way. But all 3 of those ships were shipwrecked in that area, and all 3 of them actually didn't have any fatalities. So they were all kind of happy stories for the most part, other than the ship pieces themselves. But there's people that you can actually see them out on the beach now, which is a neat thing to check out if you're on the way to the lighthouse.
Okay, so somebody wants to come and be on their way to the lighthouse. Let's talk about that a little bit. How does somebody get to the Sable Light?
Yeah, for sure. So the best way to get there is to take H58 in, either, from Grand Marais or from Munising. It's much closer to Grand Marais. And you would park, as if you're going to the Hurricane River campground, you would park in that day use area there. And from there, it's about a 1.5 mile walk down a dirt road to the light station. And so during the summer, we offer tours there, and the museum is open, so that's June through September. We offer those things. And then in the fall and at other times, the grounds are open, but in the winter, H58 is not plowed. So I would use great caution if you're thinking about coming out anytime after it starts snowing. But that's how you would get there.
So summer, fall, really, that kind of time, spring, summer, fall. Winter for hardy, maybe crazy souls if they want to give it a try, right?
Yeah, I mean, H58 turns into a snowmobile trail. So if you're a snowmobiler, you could certainly pull into Hurricane River, but you would still be walking, or rather maybe snowshoeing out to the lighthouse, because we do keep that gate up all winter long and during the summer as well. So no matter what time of year, you're still hiking that last 1.5 miles out to the lighthouse.
I'll take summer.
And go by
It's
kayak.
really nice,
Yeah,
Me
traveling
too.
by.
Yeah. Well, the fall's nice too because you get the colors.
Sure.
Going.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right. But this is really interesting, and you guys sound like you have a lot of fun talking about it and telling the story. When you're sharing this story, what are people saying when they hear it, especially someone that maybe has never been by the big lake or been by lighthouses like this, or they've just seen pictures? What are you hearing from folks when they come and they visit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we get visitors from all over the country and all over the world. So people who are totally unfamiliar with how big the Great Lakes are, they are way more like, especially Lake Superior, is way more like an inland sea than what you might be used to, say, even downstate, something smaller, like, say, Houghton Lake downstate. You hear lake, this is nothing like most lakes. And so oftentimes people are just so taken aback by just the sheer size and grandeur of Lake Superior. And then you can really wow them with the stories that the lighthouse keepers have written down and the rescues that they've had. And, I always like to wow people with the fact that the storms here are so powerful that lighthouse tower, they wrote about it shaking like a leaf when those storms would roll in. And that lighthouse tower has 4-foot thick walls. So, it's always just so surprising and awe-inspiring at how powerful, this lake is. And people love a good survival story and a good perseverance story. And I think lighthouses really embody that on Lake Superior.
You are so right. And it's interesting because I do have a little bit of that vertigo thing happening. So when I did go up and I was shaking like I was in a storm, and knowing that those walls are really, really thick. And what it must have been for a lighthouse keeper to scamper up those 98 stairs, and they're pie-shaped. They're black against white. So again, that kind of plays a little bit with my vertigo head, and they are open. So scampering up there to light that lens and knowing that the storm is coming and brewing and, being up and down and checking on that light too, you really do understand what commitment it was. It's, classic job security, of course.
I guess so. If you're willing to do it, yeah. So, you guys, tell us a little bit how we can learn more about what to see and do, not only at the Sable Point Light Station, but at Pictured Rocks. Where can people that are listening to the podcast go to find out more about this place?
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you're listening to a podcast, you're more than likely already on your computer or on a phone. And so that's going to be one of the easiest places to find out information about us is either through our website or through social media. We're on Facebook and on Instagram, and I do my best to keep all of those things updated and fun and fresh for everyone. So, yeah, that's where I would start. And then, Emma, if you want to talk about some programs that we do.
Yeah, so I know I do a lot of public programs during the summer, and I know that's not the season we're heading into right now, but in the winter we have snowshoeing, we have a couple of groomed ski trails, we have a lot of ice climbing as well. We have an ice festival every year inside of our park boundaries that's really popular and pretty big now. I know one thing we always remind visitors to, Hannah kind of pointed us in all the right directions of where to go to get information, but we always encourage people to plan like a park ranger, is what we say and tell people. Your trip up here might be subject to different weather changes. Storms, especially this time of year, destroy trails, staircases. Snow shuts down a lot of our roads. Waves can be 12 to 15 feet, even during early fall, or winter. So it's really important to bring the proper gear, have, alternative plans, plan ahead and plan like we would plan as park rangers too, because it's definitely still the wilderness out there.
Oh, yeah. Now, speaking of planning, what do you have in store for this 150th birthday party?
Yeah, absolutely. We're so excited about this. It's definitely an event that we don't want to let pass by without celebrating. So we're definitely in the works. We're still in the planning stages right now, but we're hoping to have some special events happening out at the lighthouse, not just on that specific Sunday. I think it's the Sunday next year. The birthday of our lighthouse would be August 18th, I believe. But some events surrounding that day. So even if you're not going to come out on August 18th, we might still have some special events going on throughout that month and perhaps throughout the summer. But we're still in the planning stages for it. We're really excited to, celebrate the lighthouse and hopefully draw some more people out here as well.
Well, I think this will help because you guys certainly sound like you're having a lot of fun with it and talking about it. Appreciate your time to talk about it today, where it's obviously you guys are having fun with it and you want to share this story and people should make the trip, right?
Yeah, we love the lighthouse. It's one of my favorite places to work. We're trying to, draw a little bit more attention to it. I'm currently working on some oral history projects, speaking with a few people, a few of the last people to actually live in the lighthouse. So we're working on some neat projects that way as well to try and draw more attention to our lighthouse and just collect more history about it. There's a lot about the lighthouse that we're still finding out and still learning.
Well, it's been a good time talking with you guys today about it, and certainly appreciate it. That is Emma Olechnowicz and Hannah Bradburn talking about the Sable Point Lighthouse at the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. Thanks, you guys. It's been a lot of fun having you on.
You're terrific.
Yeah.
What a dynamic duo.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you made time for us today.
Thank
you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This was fun. Yeah.
All righty.
That's Emma Olechnowicz and Hannah Bradburn joining us today here on the podcast. And Frida, just the energy. I mean, we've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people at the national parks and these historic sites around Lake Superior. And so many of them sound like these two, like Hannah and Emma, that energy. And that's worth making the trip just to go and experience that. And you did just recently.
Oh,
right?
my gosh. I really have to tell you, it wasn't so bad going up. Going down those stairs, I was holding on to that handrail like it was my lifeline. But you're absolutely right, Walt. It gives me such hope for the future. When you meet up with Hannah and Emma and you understand they love their job, they love what the national parks stand for. And the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation is so lucky to have young people involved that are really seeing the big picture.
Yeah, that is true. Now, if there's an idea for the podcast that you might have that you might like to hear us talk about, you can always find us through the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, and you can send an email, send a note, a message, and we will look into it because we're always looking to tell the stories of what's going on around the big lake, the Lake Superior area, the national parks, and beyond. So, we appreciate you listening in again today for another episode of the Lake Superior podcast. I'm Walt Lindala.
I'm Frida Waara. Thanks for listening. The National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, NPLSF, is the only official nonprofit 501c3 fundraising partner of the National Park Service for all 5 U.S. national park sites on Lake Superior.
To learn more about NPLSF projects and programs, you can visit the website at nplsf.org or friend them on Facebook.
I'm Frida Waara.
And I'm Walt Lindala. Thanks for listening to the Lake Superior podcast.
This podcast made possible with the support of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation and Media Brew Communications.
This episode brought to you by Cafe Imports, Minneapolis-based importers of fine specialty green coffees. Independently owned and operated since 1993, Cafe Imports has been dedicated to decreasing its impact on the earth through renewable energy, carbon neutrality, and by supporting conservational efforts in places where quality coffee is grown and also where quality coffee is consumed. Where does your coffee come from?
And by the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. As a nonprofit, we rely on support from listeners like you. If you like what you hear, please consider a donation. To learn more and make a gift, visit us at www.gosuperior.org.